it's a goal. Who got the assist? Who got the assist?
Hello everyone. So it's almost time. 4 weeks of rising pre-season chatter has now reached a crescendo as we embark on our final pod before the deadline. Now, you really do fun in the trenches here this week, not going to lie. We're amid a drafting frenzy with Sam and I exchanging messages constantly about player X versus player Y, and also deeping about which of the 10 or 11 possible ways we could go, as we kind of also go about our daily lives and don't neglect work and childcare and things like that. I doubt we'll find our way out of Tinkertown this pod, but hopefully we'll give you some food for thought in amongst our ramblings. Anyway, joined by Sam, as always. I'm sorry we're a day late, mate. I had my interview this morning, which went well, fingers crossed. Thanks for moving across to Tuesday. And yeah, everyone who's listening, normally Mondays, as you probably know, is when we normally record. You all right, mate? How you doing?
Yeah, all good. It's finally dawned on me how close we are to the start of the season. So yeah, fully in panic mode, trying to get all my thoughts out on paper and really flesh out exactly what 15 I need to be going with. But hopefully this pod will help myself, you, and you, the listener, as well. In the meantime, we are Who Got the Assist. On today's pod, it is a pretty packed one, so we're going to run through it with as much detail, but also as quickly as we possibly can. Lots going on. It is the return of Pick Your Fighter, which you'll remember from last season if you were with us this time last year. Lots of ways we could go with this, but we've picked out 5, we believe, key questions we think people are asking across the various popular drafts we've seen out there in the past week or two. We've also got bold claims returning for yet another season. We're going to talk briefly about our personal aims for the season, loosely, of course, but we touched upon them in 10 Mistakes a little bit. But of course, let's spell those out again before locking in our drafts for game week 1. Bold claims for this week in particular as well, not just the season-long bold claims, but this week specifically ahead of game week 1. And any final bits of advice before we then take a quick look at our very unlocked drafts ahead of game week 1. So a lot to go through in the next hour and a half, 2 hours probably. It is Tuesday, the 13th of August. As Tom mentioned, we do normally record on a Monday. So usually it's around half time in the Monday night football, as I'm sure it will be next week coming. In the meantime, though, lots to go through. So shall we get on with it, Tom?
Yes, let's indeed. And I think kind of the first thing to discuss this week is, as you said, the idea of Pick Your Fighter. So something that, we were thinking about when we met for a pizza all that time ago, not this summer, but last summer, when we were kind of thinking of sort of new ideas and something for pre-season. We thought we'd bring this one back because there are so many different iterations, so many different routes that we've seen out there with how people are setting up their teams, that kind of those drafts which are flying around left, right, and center. And it's just fascinating, really. They've done such a good job with the pricing this year, as we've said, and loads of other people have said. I don't think you'll find a single complaint, really, beyond nitpicking about how they set up this year. Massive contrast to last year, where we were really struggling to, we were looking at, the 4.5 million fourth defender who wasn't going to play, stuff like that. Whereas now there's kind of big decisions to be made, I think, which is really interesting to go into in this section, Sam.
Absolutely. And there's no better place to start, I believe, than talking about the king of FPL himself, Mo Salah, and whether or not he's going to be in our game week 1 drafts, and also whether spreading the funds might be a more prudent maneuver come game week 1, especially with a certain Norwegian man costing 15 million this season. Funds are going to be pretty tight. And a lot of the prevailing winds at the moment are basically saying that Salah is not really worth the 12.5, despite him being 2.5 cheaper than Haaland. Really interesting question to go through. And it's not quite a classic in the sense of it's one versus another, but it's more about whether Salah is the pick or whether spreading the funds elsewhere is the better idea here. Obviously, with the caveat that you're probably going with Haaland up top in this scenario. But yeah, lots of paths we can go down here. Have you recanted at all on your Salah reasoning, Tom?
Yeah, I have a little bit, I'm afraid. I suppose I did say a few pods back that I wasn't really going to start tinkering like properly, you know, entering Tinkertown, taking an abseil into the abyss until we got to the crunched period, and I'm really in it now. And one of the first things that I did after listening to the end of Correspondent Planet FPL, Dan Lord, Liverpool correspondent, and James talking, was really think about Mo Salah, and obviously how good he is as an FPL asset, his enduring quality and consistency is unquestionable. But this question in terms of pick your fighter isn't really kind of a classic VS. It's not a classic kind of Salah versus X. It's more of a Salah versus Jota and 5 million effectively. So Salah 5 or Jota and Trent is a question that can be folded into this. And there's all sorts of kind of path lines you can go down. But I just kind of, I look at the teams that I could possibly put together with Salah and look at all the different sorts of places where I've got to make cutbacks and I've got to trust with a beta pick, a Riker pick, effectively in loads of places. Not even that. Maybe even like a theta pick or something like that. It's never really kind of anywhere near what I really want. And you know, we both discussed this kind of offline, Sam. But a lot of my thinking over the last few days has been just basically resting on buts. Like when I'm picking players and I'm going through players for my drafts, what is the but about this player, and trying to, I guess, center on those players where there are less buts than others. And unsurprisingly, the more you spend on a player, there's that sort of price quality heuristic thing that you're spending more money, therefore you assume there's going to be best quality about them. Maybe there's that going on, but there's also a bit of truth about that. So things such as not having Salah, meaning that you can go from having a defense of Guardiola plus 4.0s, 4.5s, you know, relying on Barco, I think I was doing at one point, to play the first kind of couple of games. I can go from that situation to having a defense of Trent, having a defense of Guardiola, having a defense of Porro. I mean, that looks like, in terms of net value, so much better than that. And a lot rests on kind of the analysis that was presented on the Planet FPL pod. Obviously, I haven't watched the preseason friendly to Liverpool, but where Jota does seem to be kind of the playing number 9 at the moment. We know what Jota can do. His underlying data last year was okay within the time frame that he did play. I think 14 starts obviously isn't fantastic. His non-pen XGI per 90 was not anywhere near Salah. We know Salah's a bit of a monster, but the hope is that within the slot system, where the wingers do seem to be playing high and wide a little bit more, we may see that Jota playing as the starting 9, at least to begin with, could be a 7.5 good value. And we did see during the pricing pod as well, I did a homebrew analysis and Jota came head and shoulders above West. And I said at that point that if it doesn't look like Jota is going to be the starting 9 for Liverpool, that he would be amazing value and could be a really interesting player. So I think at the moment I am looking at going with Jota and Trent basically over Salah. And call me a coward, but I think I'm going to want both of them if I was going to go without Salah. It's kind of a case of coverage, kind of a case of cowardice, because you know I don't think you can get away from acknowledging like what an amazing FPL asset Salah is. Where are you with this?
Yeah, so I completely accept and agree with the fact that if you're going to go against Salah, you might want 2, maybe 3 Liverpool assets just to feel a little bit better about yourself. It's more of a psychological thing than anything else. We know that it's not a literal coverage. It's not like Jota picks up all the assists for Salah, but there is that bit of comfort blanket if you've got a Liverpool asset in your side and you know the XG is not bad. You know that the goal threat's there if he's starting centre forward. And I am focusing more on Jota here because I think some people are still looking at squeezing Trent in alongside Salah in some circumstances. It's not easy, but I have made drafts where it could be done. Whereas with Jota, I think it is more often than not basically a one or the other in the midfield for Liverpool. Now, with Jota, you did mention the underlying data, the fact that if he does play centre forward and gets good minutes, he could be a bit of a game breaker at 7.5. I completely agree. I think the problem with all of that I keep coming back to at the moment, and the reason that it's not sitting right with me seeing him in my draft at the moment, is that big if. And you mentioned at the start, we're trying to reduce the buts. Jota almost certainly will start the season. And I've said it in a couple of my videos as well. He'll probably be the centre forward for Liverpool at the start of the year. But they do have a lot of depth there. They can play Gakpo there. They can play Nunez there. As much as we like to laugh at him, he'll get minutes. So how many minutes is Jota going to get week in, week out, especially after game week 1 is out of the way? It's a big question mark. We just don't know whether he's going to be a 55-minute man, a 60-minute man, an 80-minute man every week. And I think that's the problem with Jota at the moment. If he's on the pitch, he's fantastic, but it's how long is he going to stay on the pitch for? And one player that I'd offer up as an alternative, if you wanted that security, and okay, he's not wearing the same red coloured shirt as Salah, but Bruno Fernandes, 90 minutes, 4 million cheaper, on penalties, on a lot of set pieces, creative threat, and underperformed his data quite drastically last season. That might be a compromise I could look at in the last few days if I was to sacrifice Mo, and then also spread that extra 4 million elsewhere, probably across the defence and into another midfield position as well. But Jota does look amazing. I could yet go with him. It's a 5 million option cheaper than Salah is. And for the risk of maybe getting 60 minutes rather than 90 in a couple of game weeks in the first 5, it might well be worth it. And he could easily still go off. But I'm really trying to, like you say, reduce the big buts in my draft come game week 1. And maybe I only have 1 or 2 players in there that have those ifs. And I feel like, I don't know, something about Jota just is screaming out to me saying this is going to end up being a transfer out in 2 or 3 weeks when he loses his place. And I know it seems unlikely at the moment, but you can just see it happening.
Sure. I mean, 2 things. Bruno, good shout. The problem is that, and this has been discussed quite a lot in loads of different places that I'm kind of part of, is that trusting United's in August when they've made loads of transfers. We've seen this every single season, I think, with United at the start of the year, that it's been quite difficult with trusting them, especially over the last couple of years at least. I don't know. I feel like they're very much a wait and see for me, United. I don't,
but not
really
Bruno
know.
though.
No, I know.
We know Bruno. Like, he always gets the chances. The front 4 hasn't really changed that much. Obviously, the centre forward is a bit iffy at the moment, but the wingers are pretty much locked in place. Bruno is going to create chances, and they did just beat City, well, on penalties, but they gave them a good game. I don't know. I feel like having a problem with the team and having a problem with the player in the team are 2 different questions here.
Yeah, I mean, I'd point out that one thing that the likes of Johan Wissa, Jacob Murphy, Neil Maupay, and Dominic Calvert-Lewin have in common is that they had better non-pen XGI per 90 than him last season.
Don't get the 90s though.
Yeah, that would still be something though that would make me kind of wonder a little bit about that. But no, I completely see where you're coming from. I'm just throwing in the opposite side of it effectively.
Yeah, absolutely.
And on Jota, I agree that he is in of himself a punt. The thing is that perhaps it's not him that allows you to do it. Buying him instead of Salah also means that you compare, if you want to keep a premium mid slot, a Saka or a Son in your team, you can introduce one of those players into your team. And look, like, you know, at the start, the drafts we were sharing not very long ago didn't have any Arsenal in them at all, did they? And I think the closer it's got to game week 1, especially with that Wolves fixture first up, the more I think there are people like myself thinking, oh wow, how can I go without Arsenal, who are, you know, many people's tip to win the league this year, obviously a club I support, and so just a fabulous team effectively, and allowing kind of space for a Saka or indeed a Son if you're inclined to go that way into your team, as well as having the Liverpool quote unquote cover in the likes of Jota, or if you went with Szoboszlai or something like that, or wherever you want to go alongside a Trent. That feels to me like it kind of justifies the removal of Salah to some extent. There may well be, you know, hey, here we are in 2 weeks' time, just kind of saying, oh, wow, why didn't I go with Salah? I'm such an idiot. It's all kind of clear talisman theory. We know the pedigree of the player, etc., and so on and so on. And it may be that come Friday, there I am sat on the Salah draft. But I just don't know. At the moment, I kind of feel like it's probably going to be okay. And I think there are enough options. There is enough kind of justification, the value spread to side on, if we're looking at pick your fighter and the spreading of the funds idea rather than Salah himself, just because of the wider ramifications that spending that 5 million on one player more than an alternative, which isn't that kind of it's not a like for like substitute, it's like inferior alternative. I grant that there's loads of kind of things around that, but it does enable lots of other players in your team who you probably wouldn't have been able to afford before, who do perhaps fall into that sort of category of having less buts than
Yeah.
than the ones you would have to compromise with. So it is a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B, effectively.
Yeah, completely agreed. And there's definitely merit to going without one or the other of Salah or Haaland. And I think at the moment, Salah's the one that I'd more willingly sacrifice right now. The other main reason I think is because there's just other assets a little bit cheaper that are close enough to what he can produce in other very competitive teams. Whereas with Haaland, there's a bigger drop down, and it feels like more of a drop down in terms of the quality of player that you're bringing in for him. The other thing I should mention on Salah, just a strategic point perhaps, looking across the first 5 game weeks in particular, there's definitely an argument to make that you could start with Saka and Haaland. And again, obviously, if you're thinking that Salah isn't the best captaincy shout in game week 1, Isak at home to Southampton is definitely up there, possibly Saka at home to Wolves as well. But if you're willing to say no to Salah captaincy in game week 1, you could go without him all the way through to game week 5 probably, at which point he probably is the best captaincy shout, and just make the double swap from Haaland and Saka, who play each other respectively, to someone like a Watkins with a Salah. And that could be quite a nice double swap ahead of game week 5 to also give you the best captaincy option in that week without necessarily needing to start with Salah from the off.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know quite where we land on this one. I do think that there are loads of people who are not going to go over Salah, effectively. They're going to obviously know the pedigree, and I know the pedigree. We all know the pedigree. I think there's been more hours spent talking about Salah on this pod than any other player out there over the last few years. I always say, and I said in Tasman Theory, that there are a few certainties in FPL. There'll be winners, there'll be losers, and Mo Salah will score 200 points. I'm just hoping it's just not going to be this year. And my bold claims are reflected that maybe there'll be a bit of a baton pass. But yeah, I mean, it's very much kind of getting into team structure, that one a little bit. Mm-hmm. And, neither of us are by any means locked, but it does feel to me at the moment, now I've started kind of properly tinkering, that I will be going with Haaland and I won't be going with Salah as it stands, just because of everything else that unlocks. Right, let's move on to number 2, the second chat. It's more of a battle royale, the Royal Rumble of many players in the 5.5 to 5 million midfield slots. So there's lots going on here. Tom Campbell in the chat asked 2 questions. Any West Ham love? He says he likes Kudus. No, I'm not sure if it was very sort of wait and see there, Tom. But he mentions for Aston Villa, Rodgers or Bailey, or even both. Obviously, Rodgers is within this sort of category. Bailey as well, we can come on to potentially as a kind of a syndicate talking about Rodgers. So there's quite a lot going on here in this very, very, very fun end of the fun zone. And the bobsleigh effectively has really taken off. It's cool run-ins throughout the FPL community. You recently did a video on this, and you've been looking through all of these, Sam. So for those who haven't seen it, and why haven't you seen it? I watched it with my daughter earlier on, and she really enjoyed it. Where are you at with these guys? And I suspect I'm kind of aligned with you now.
Yeah, so piling in the 5 million mids to this discussion as well. I did a show specifically on the 5.5s, but there are some great 5 million options now appearing. Rodgers and Bob being probably the prime 2 right now. I think Diallo got a little bit of a flirtation, but since he got taken off early in the Community Shield, I think it dawned on people that maybe his minutes are not that secure, especially with Garnacho now getting the minutes off the bench for him. It looks like that could be a little bit questionable. But this price point in particular, as Kira mentioned in the chat, is really juicy this season. I think the 5.5s in particular, there's going to be at least 2 or 3 that take FPL by storm. So starting from the top in my personal order of preference, and I think the first 4 or 5 are all very much of a muchness and very good options all in their own right. But I really like Smith Rowe for obvious reasons. He's got plenty of pedigree. He has had his injury problems. That is crucial to note. But that seems to be one isolated injury that he worked very hard to get rid of and had surgery on. And it looks like that is seemingly a thing of the past now. He's obviously gone to Fulham to be one of their key men. He's going to take that number 10 role, as we've already seen in pre-season, probably pushing Pereira out of it slightly. So that's a bit of a bold statement from Marco Silva straight away, and a show of faith. And already in both of the pre-season matches, he scored almost immediately. So yeah, he looks absolutely fantastic. He'll be one of their key men. Good underlying data when he's been fit. And Fulham's fixtures for the opening 5 are fantastic, including Man United in game week 1. They were really bad for the XGC last season. So I'd imagine Fulham score there. After that, sorry, go on.
Yeah, I've got to obviously declare a bias there because I love the man.
Yeah, we all do.
there's definitely a bit of a doubt around Smith Rowe. Like when he was fit, there's definitely kind of an overperformance sort of angle, that sort of narrative that can definitely be fed into. The thing with Smith Rowe is that, yes, there's been a lot of kind of fitness difficulty. You detailed just the one injury. What is kind of going a bit unnoticed is that last year he was available for 30 plus of Arsenal's games.
Yeah,
he wasn't fit. He just wasn't used because the team had effectively moved on without him, sadly. And yes, there's a kind of some development has been missed out on. But given that sort of prominence in the team and everything that you've cited there, I more than back Smith Rowe to do the business at Fulham, especially within the context of those fixtures being a kind of introduction. Take the United game how you will, but back-to-back promoted teams after that too at 5.5 look very kind of juicy to me.
Yeah, it's lovely.
At low price. And we mentioned it last week when we were talking about Burris Diaz and Smith Rowe as being kind of those sort of heart picks, and at that price you're more than welcome to go with that, honestly. I think a lot of the kind of the overperformance stuff does boil down to, are you sat on FBref looking at the underlying data, or have you seen the player? And during COVID I had nothing better to do but to see the player, and my eyes, and when I've seen him play subsequently, is a really high quality player, which is quite difficult to objectively measure. But it's something that, at that price, I'm more than willing to back effectively. So he's one of those that, when he came into my team, I think I had Andreas before that for the reasons that you've kind of started to touch on. But kind of since he's proved his fitness, I think he didn't start the first game he played, but he started the second one. More than happy to go with that, due to all those factors that I've detailed, and just having that kind of general sort of love for the player that you're going in at 5.5. If it's not Saka, I'm happy kind of backing a premium because he's worth that premium price. But if it's a cheaper player, if it's 5.5, I'm more than happy to kind of go with your heart on that sort of little pick, because we'll talk about kind of punt to safe, I suppose, ratio later on. But I'm more than happy with that one there. Sorry, go ahead.
Agreed. That sort of 7th to 8th attacker, especially if you're rotating the 7th and 8th, seems like the fun zone, and Smith Rowe definitely falls into that. But on the kind of side of it where you think, yeah, he probably is going to get 80 minutes a match and probably still has good underlying data and will be fairly talismanic. So he ticks a lot of the boxes there. Moving on to others. So in my video, I rated Minte as number 2. For those who don't know, Brighton's new signing, was at Newcastle last season, but was out on loan at Feyenoord. Absolutely ridiculous underlying data in the Eredivisie. 0.65 or 0.64 XG per 90, I believe it was, and 0.3-ish XA per 90. Now, obviously, those numbers will come down a bit in the Premier League. We don't expect them to be matched here, but that is still absolutely fantastic and should translate very healthily to the Premier League. He's also been phenomenal in pre-season, and I know we shouldn't really pay too much close attention to pre-season form, but when it's a new player fitting into a new system under a new manager, and we're seeing them consistently get the nod at right wing in what is a competitive lineup and playing so well, I think it is quite easy to sort of pin your colours to the mast a little bit on that one and say, you know what, he is probably going to be a breakout star. So at 5.5, I think he's fantastic. It's just whether or not the opening 3 game weeks and the fixtures that Brighton have are good enough to fight off a Smith Rowe, or do you want to go with both of them, for instance? Because after game week 4, Brighton's fixtures do look, after game week 3, so into game week 4, they do look very good. So definitely an option I'm not saying no to even from the off, because he just looks that talented, to be quite frank. And then quick mention as well, Brereton Diaz in the chat too. I'm wearing my Saints top. Great underlying data for a player representing such a poor club last season. Will be playing pretty much out of position for Southampton. We won't score millions of goals, but the goals we do score will come through either him or Armstrong. And I do expect his 0.45 XG per 90 to be pretty much the same, if not slightly better, in the Southampton regime, because we are a bit better in front of goal and a bit better at creating chances than Sheffield United were, or at least it seems that way.
Yeah, I mean, the only other one that might be worth a call out. I mean, I was at the start of the time looking at like Hudson Odoi and the Langer. There have been a few signings at Forest which have slightly kind of worried me a tiny bit, but I think they're absolutely fine. I think if I wasn't going to a Forest pick, it would be Gibbs White. So I think at the moment I'm not entirely sure on those. I think Kamada at Palace could be a really interesting one. Under Glasner, they're playing kind of 2 10s behind the striker, who will eventually, of course, be Mateta, but it's looking like it's probably going to be Odegaard for game week 1. Okay underlying data under Glasner. Didn't really set the world on fire with Lazio, which is why he was able to go off and join Palace. You're looking kind of first, I think it was 2021, you're looking kind of 13 non-pen SGI for that year, which is, that's fairly decent within the scope of the Premier League. You're looking at kind of, 29th, 30th last year, sort of an Eze sort of level, and that could be fine at 5.5 really, especially if you kind of, for whatever reason, don't really fancy Eze. You're worried about Eze and potentially Man City slapping in the release clause money and him having his head turned and being off all of a sudden. I think he would be absolutely fine at that price bracket, honestly. But yeah, I do like Minte. Minte. I really hope they do a little video, when they say, you can pronounce my name like this.
I was watching some YouTube comps that said it was Minte, but that, again, you never know. It could be wrong.
I do like Minte. I don't mind Brighton's kind of opening at all. I know that on the FDR, it's obviously the Arsenal game is difficult, but actually Everton, Man United, Ipswich, Nottingham Forest, 3 of those 5 being at home, don't mind that at all. Especially if you did start with like a Hudson Odoi or even someone at 6.5-ish, that you would then kind of having the first 3 fixtures and then taking them down to Minte after that to facilitate another transfer potentially. I really like that as kind of a bit of an early season play if that's the way you're inclined. So yeah, that's fine. What do you make of the bobsleigh, Sam?
Yeah, I'm tempted. I am tempted, but mainly because such respectable City FPL managers are really hot on him, and I will bow to their experience and knowledge. I'm looking at Luke, for instance, on Twitter, and he seems to have him in his preferred starting lineup at the moment. That does go a long way in my mind, and I'm always cautious with new City assets or flavor of the month City assets, because as we know, all it takes is a player to come back to fitness or Pep just to wake up on another side of the bed and all of a sudden they're out of the side. Even a player of Foden's talents took years to become a reliable, consistent starter, getting 70, 80 minutes a match. And until last year, quite frankly, we were still slightly scratching our heads as to when he was going to play, when he was going to be benched. Bob is a lot newer to the side. He has looked fantastic in pre-season, had a great game in the Community Shield, of course, and looks like he should at least get the first couple, especially with other Man City players coming back late from the Euros and from other international tournaments. However, like I mentioned with Jota, I am trying to minimize these minutes risks. And could anyone really say to me they'd be massively surprised to see Bob benched against Chelsea in a tough game? I don't know. I think it's actually very likely he plays the Ipswich game, more likely than the Chelsea one. I think if I had to pick my starting lineup now or guess my starting lineup, he would be in both of them. But you could see Bernardo Silva just coming straight back in and playing right wing for control against Chelsea, and then Bob obviously being unleashed at home to Ipswich in game week 2. So I think in summary, it's a nice price point to take that risk, especially if you can comfortably have him sat as your 8th attacker and on your bench whenever he looks like he's not playing. But generally speaking, I think if he was starting week in, week out for me, that's too much of a risk. The one positive is that we should get early leaks on a lot of the Man City matches in the first 4 or 5 game weeks because of the time of their kickoffs. And we know we usually get fairly reliable team news on Man City before the deadline passes. So maybe you could take a chance and just wait out for the team news to see if he's starting before the deadline each time for the first 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah, I think it depends how dogmatic Pep's going to be. So it's been quite widely publicized that it's going to be Bob and Savinho playing for that right wing slot. I don't know what the circumstances will be. There's definitely a lot of, as you mentioned with Bernardo Silva, a case of game state going on with Bernardo and Foden kind of playing more inside. Yeah, I mean, it's City at the end of the day. You're always going to be, the caveat's always going to be, yeah, but it's Pep. And I think that you've got to go into that sort of risk eyes wide open. It may well be that against Chelsea, he just comes off the bench, honestly. But the carrot is always going to be kind of a Ipswich game. And you kind of take it from there, really. At the moment, I've got him in my team. I don't really have a rotation for him. I think if I did see, for example, that he was not likely to be starting versus Chelsea, I don't know whether this week, because it's the Sunday, we're going to get enough an indication of what's going on with them. Then maybe I'd kind of throw Barco on and see what was, and kind of figure it out that way. But the fact is that if he is kind of part of the battle for that slot, and because he's been at City for a while, and it sounds like they let Palmer go effectively because they were gambling on him breaking through.
Yeah,
you can never predict Pep, but the hope is always that he's had a good preseason. Will he be rewarded for that? It sounds like, as you said, that a lot of people who are a lot more clued up on this than we are expecting that, including Johnny Pringle, the Planet FPL correspondent. So my feeling is that we're probably going to be okay with that, but you don't know. And it could be that I end up kind of removing that slot, taking it away and just pumping for another 5.5 or doing something else with it, going for a bigger defender or going for a different striker. Yeah. But at this point, it feels like one of those kind of gift horses you don't want to look in the mouth. But there is a whiff of, by game week 3, all of us kind of going, "Oh my lord, what are we doing?" And then end of the season, do you remember Oscar Bob? Remember him? That could well be the thing. There's so much going on here. It sounds like kind of Smith Rose, the 5.5, 5.0. I mean, you are kind of looking at a few kind of reprobates like Elliot Anderson, who's signed for big money at Nottingham Forest. You're looking at kind of the dregs in a lot of places. But Tom, earlier on, I mentioned this question, did mention Morgan Rogers, who perhaps is one we should be talking about. Mr. Ramsey is now fit, or Jacob Ramsey, which could potentially impact his position. But another one that you could potentially go with, and there's definitely an idea that if you were kind of looking at your 8th attacker for whatever reason, and you need to kind of free up some money, you didn't want you could have like Bob and Rogers flying around and have Rogers for game week 1, Bob for game week 2, and play it that way. I mean, there's definitely something in that potentially.
Yeah, there is. And I think especially if you're looking at having a Salah Haaland draft, then those two become more and more popular, and even potentially the combination of both of them could be a way to unlock the double premium. For me, I think Rodgers is a player I'm interested in. I think has more longer term benefit than Bob at the moment. I think I could more reliably expect Rodgers to get decent minutes for a longer period of time. Bob might end up being that player as well, but I think at this point it's just too soon to tell. It could be a gamble worth taking at 5 million though. Rodgers will have lower upside, but also is in a very reasonable team. Obviously, Aston Villa getting Champions League football will come into it at some point, and rotation will probably strike. But for the first 4 or 5 weeks, I think you could probably fairly reliably predict him to start. Ramsey will factor in, of course. They got Philogene back, who can obviously cover off on the right wing, but you wouldn't expect him to necessarily take Rodgers' place. And actually, interestingly, Buendia got some minutes off the bench. And I honestly forgot Buendia was even at Aston Villa because of all the injuries he's had. But he could also factor at certain points this season alongside Barkley as well. So there is depth. I think as, again, an 8th attacker with a 5 million midfielder, you would normally expect them to be that. He's an absolutely fine pick and could end up being a bit of a breakout star at that price point. But let's not expect him to give us the value of a 5th or 6th attacker, because quite frankly, I think we're going to end up being disappointed and frustrated at certain random intervals where he just gets rested or rotated for whatever reason, because they do have the depth and European football to contest with.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of is the same proposition as going with Bob, isn't it? In lots of ways. They both had the same buts about them.
Yeah,
potentially. So yeah, go into a pick like that with your eyes wide open is all we can say. I mean, he's in my team. I'm sure he may end up being in the FPL Twitter zeitgeist as we get closer and closer to game week 1, because I think all it will take is a couple of much bigger voices than ours to pick up a Bob.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a funny name, isn't he?
He might be in just for that, to be honest.
Yeah,
it's fun.
Yeah, Barb. I can't wait to hear. I love the word cheating kick because I'm Barb. Fantastic. Right. Okay. Moving on to the premium defenders then. A bit of a four-way face-off for these guys, I think. We've spoken already about going with the 1 million kind of draft with Haaland, if you don't count Saka or Son as playing part of the premium picture. I think this probably best encompasses 4 key men who are Porro, who's on the screen if you're watching YouTube, Saliba, Gvardiol, and Trent. So Gvardiol's not left my squad since the very beginning. I've seen that there are a few sort of suggestions that he may kind of start the season centre back and kind of work his way to the left. I think he definitely, obviously, it may have been a bit of a purple patch, and there were some conversions towards the end of last season when the XG was tiny. But I mean, City's fixtures over the longest term are very good, and it wouldn't take very much for him to get a return. So game week 2 against Ipswich, he scores a goal. Suddenly he's kind of sat at 6.2, 6.3, such as how FPL moves. I think he's got it in his locker, which we're all surprised by. We were kind of expecting, if any of you have owned him on Football Manager, a more kind of orthodox centre back. There he is recast as Pep, as the second coming of João Cancelo. I'm obviously being facetious, but I think that he's definitely worth it over the other 4, the 5.5 picks out there. And FPL Review really likes Ruben Diaz. I think that's kind of maybe predicated over the last few years rather than what we saw last year, which is when he 28 starts. He wasn't quite the stalwart of seasons past, but I think he's Gvardiol has been every draft I've done. But recently, here I am now with Trent and Porro. At the beginning, I was thinking, that the bonus point adjustment for defenders really puts me off kind of these spending big at the back. But for separate reasons, I've kind of come round to the idea of quite a heavy defense. I mean, it's a really heavy defense. It is big at the back. Nick would be very, very proud. So you're looking at Trent as that kind of sop effectively for not owning Salah on one hand, on the other hand, the proven FPL asset with 200 clubs, fantastic underlying data when he is on the pitch, and looking quite positive, I guess, if we looked at Gertrude's data. I think he's actually been linked with the move to Premier League as well. The final right back now, so that'd be interesting. And then obviously Pedro Porro, don't need to go into him too much, but I think he had the best non-pen XGI last year amongst defenders and did get over 10 attacking returns, which I think only he and Trippier actually ended up doing. Maybe Doughty did as well, Alfie Doughty. But really good fixture against Leicester as well at the start of the season. So yeah, lots more renewed interest, I think, in the premium defenders than we were seeing, Sam, not very long ago. I think not very long ago it was about, wow, look at these amazing attackers I can get. But more and more, it does seem that the there is value located within these players because they've got that clean sheet potential. Maybe not so much of Porro, but you never know. And you've also got the fact that the attacking returns obviously count a bit more for these guys, albeit Trent is definitely more of an assist than goal merchant. What do you think about these?
Yeah, I think I'm trying not to get too carried away because I've had drafts where I've got very big at the back because, quite frankly, they do look fairly accessible as soon as you remove a Salah or a Haaland. But it is worth noting that defenders will be down on the bonus points this year a little bit. Clean sheets are at an all-time low in the Premier League from last year, so maybe putting too much money in the back line is a little bit risky. On the other hand, and probably the side that I'm more leaning on right now, the sides that have the premium assets are the ones that are keeping the clean sheets. So if you want to have 3 positions, or maybe even 4 if you count the goalkeepers as well, covered off with proper points rather than just 2 points, 1 point every single week, your best chance of making that work is by bringing in the teams or players from the teams that actually have any chance of keeping clean sheets. Those are your Arsenals, your Man Cities, your Liverpools, much less so your Spurs, but Porro especially will get a few attacking returns. In terms of which specific players I'm leaning towards at the moment, I prefer Trent over all of the other defenders by quite a long way. I think he's got the right balance of clean sheet potential in the opening 5 game weeks because they've got some great fixtures from a defensive point of view, and we know what he can do going forward, especially in this new role. And now we've seen him start a game in preseason and looked pretty sharp in it as well. So no worries on Trent whatsoever. It's just whether or not you can squeeze him in alongside others for 7 million. I'm going to try my absolute best to make that happen. For what it's worth, the draft I'm going to show later today doesn't have him in, but I am trying to find ways to bring him back in very quickly. Gvardiol is another player I'm very interested in. I think that run between game week 2 and game week 4 is very hard to overlook. I can see him getting forward, getting into those inside spaces almost as a number 8 at times. And I think he will get a number of chances on goal as well. So I do really like both of them. After that, a quick word on the Arsenal defenders. I did my own little bit of research over the weekend because I've been overlooking Arsenal defenders and I didn't want to just go into the season not even thinking about them. The reason I've been overlooking them is because 3 away tough fixtures in the opening 5 against Villa, Spurs and Man City. I think we can all agree on the surface those are 3 tricky away ties. However, looking into the data from last season, their underlying expected goals conceded across the season was 0.8. So expected to concede less than a goal a game on average. That's absolutely incredible. Against the top 6, away from home only, their expected goals conceded. You can guess in the chat if you want, Tom. I think I've already told you, so I won't make you guess as well. But it's absolutely identical. It's 0.8 XGC per 90. So even away from home against the toughest opposition, it was still extremely, extremely high. It was almost no drop off whatsoever. So maybe I am completely overlooking the Arsenal defence pointlessly. And maybe I need to find a way to squeeze in some sort of Arsenal defender to cover off those clean sheets because they are that good defensively that I don't think even against the toughest opposition, we should be overlooking them. What do you think of that, Tom?
Well, I mean, I think that maybe part of that for the goalkeeper this goal.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're completely right. And I think that's something that has been concerning for a lot of us who set up initially without an Arsenal defender. I don't know exactly where, like, I think that Saliba's owned by 40% of the game at the moment. So I don't know exactly where that's come from. I suspect it's kind of him being part of the 1-2-3 last year in terms of the top scoring defenders, and he being 0.5 cheaper than White. I suppose that's kind of the way it's going to go. So from a pragmatic point of view, it's worth representing the Arsenal defence somewhere at the start. That's just how it is. There's a few anecdotes here surrounding that. There was a few years ago, Man United at the start of the season managed to this was when they were kind of half decent. No, it wasn't. It was under Mourinho. I think that was the year they came second. Where they knocked out 5 or 6 clean sheets at the start of the season. And I was wondering, why is my rank attriting every week, despite me kind of hitting the average? The reason was I didn't have the United defender. And someone like Phil Jones, who that year was actually fit and actually doing well, was just knocking away with those 6 points with a high ownership. But United get a bit of United sort of boost because of the fandom. And even though the fixtures weren't great, and an elite defense is always one to engage with, even if you look at the FDR, which can always be a bit of a misnomer. They never use 1, so it's a 4-point scale, not a 5-point scale. So it's a very, very blunt instrument. And you start the season with Wolves at home, you're probably the bookies, and I think intuitively as our FPL managers, we'd be expecting that to be a clean sheet. The Villa game last year was a very tight game until what happened. Let's not forget that. And the Spurs game, who knows what's going to happen in that one? But I do think that our defence has only been strengthened, and we're more than capable of keeping Spurs out. The City game in 5, much for muchness. We're those games, we saw what happened in the game last year versus City, and how both teams set up basically just not to lose rather than win.
You'd think it'd be the same again, right?
I would not be surprised to see. I've seen in the chat people kind of saying that the Villa game, the Spurs game, they may see goals there. The reality is that if Arsenal are able to pick up where we left off last year defensively, I find it difficult to see, other than kind of your classic City moment where they can see the 1 goal from the 1 chance, which may well happen. I think it's best to go with the odds, really, on Arsenal defence. Note on Saliba, note on Gabriel as well. I know a lot of people are avoiding Gabriel for good reason, because of what the shenanigans of Gameweek 1 last year. Let's not overstate the capacity for a centre-back to do goals. It's not very common, honestly. It really isn't. It's kind of, I think Gabriel was the highest XG among defenders last year. I think it's kind of 4-ish. I mean, that translates into 0.15 XG per game, off the top of my head.
I think it was, around that,
It's not. It is so memorable if that happens, because it's so uncommon, and you're not going to be seeing that. I know that we saw it in a friendly. I know that we can all think of a moment. I know we all can remember a moment where we've got the goal from Saliba, we've got a goal from Gabriel. I completely appreciate that, but let's not overstate how common that actually is. It's kind of availability heuristic, where you judge your kind of thought process on the most recent thing that you can think of, the most salient thing you can think of. It doesn't happen that much, honestly. And I don't know whether people are kind of looking at Saliba as kind of a route into the Arsenal defence, which is fine. But if you're looking to that as a kind of a goal a goal threat for Saliba, definitely not true. A few names here: Pierre Højbjerg, Sasek Kalinic, Diego Carlos. These are all players who perform better than him in terms of non-pen XGI. That's not even per 90. Jan-Paul Van Heck performed better than him in terms of non-pen XGI last year. That's not even per 90. That's just on the basic data of when they're on the pitch, and that just underlines the fact that you're basically buying these guys as a way into the Arsenal defence. So for me here, I'm more than happy to be considering in the premium defender bracket Trent, Gvardiol, Saliba. Trent, Gvardiol, Porro. I'm not particularly interested in Saliba as it stands. We'll come on to it in the goalkeepers in a minute. There are players obviously also in and around the price bracket. Ben White, who I always quite like. And if you do kind of think, I really fancy going with Ben White for the additional sort of attacking threat, does join the attack, absolutely fine. But I'm happy with that. Not sure why you'd be going for Fabian Schär, I think it is, in this particular price bracket. Robertson, I think he's okay. I think there were kind of some thoughts that he wasn't fit.
He's played now, though, hasn't he?
Yeah, and I think if there weren't so many rumours flying around about Trippier, not about his personal life, more about his professional, then he would be in much more teams than I'm otherwise seeing. But yeah, it really does feel like it's kind of Trent, Gvardiol, Porro all should be kind of high in mind for me. But Saliba is less in mind for me because of the goalkeepers. Should we move on to that?
Let's do it. Right. So goalkeepers, and guess who's the poster boy for the goalkeepers? Great segue there, Tom.
Yeah, so it's David Raya. So I'm not gonna lie. In many drafts, Raya is now a thing, and that is based on Sam sending me a very, very lengthy and insightful voice message, which is he's basically just repeated verbatim just now about the Arsenal defence over the course of the last year. You're paying 0.5 less than one of the defenders and getting that route to the Arsenal defence. So I had a look at goalkeepers, and I said previously, I'm only interested in paying a 4.5 for a keeper, but no matter how I've spun it, I've not been happy with any keeper this year. I've not kind of got one where I'm kind of going, oh yeah, that's all right. I know there's a few people kind of defaulting to Henderson, for example, which I'm sure you'll mention in a second, Sam.
Yeah.
But speaking again to the points I was making about the Arsenal defence and the fact that you should probably just go with the logic of what you know and your observations from last year. And I think Arsenal have been decent. It wasn't kind of a 1 year thing. It's been building really with how Arteta sets the team up, and we've kind of had these observations sort of building over the course of time. I am more than happy now to go with Raya, I think, and that's obviously facilitated again going back to the Salah point of removing Salah. It's definitely kind of helped me just kind of think, you know what, at least to start the season, I think I'm definitely on the early wildcard train, that's for sure. But having that route into the Arsenal defence, 0.5 million less, is absolutely fine with me. And plus, last year he got 0.04 XGI, Sam. The year before that, 0.23. So he gets 10 points for a goal. And that is the real quiz here, because he's likely to do a goal. And we both know it. And, we'll be counting our blessings for getting those 10 points. But yeah, I do think that Raya has a lot of, yes, it's covering Arsenal, but I think there's a lot of merit to doing that, especially if you don't fancy a Saliba and have that 0.5 million spare. Just do the swap around, because you can get a Munoz, for example, in defence over a 4.5 million defender if you do that way, or have 0.5 million to spend elsewhere in your team. But yeah, I really like Raya now. I think I'm more likely to go there. And plus, even if they're difficult games on paper, according to the FDR, Villa, Spurs, City, I think he might actually get some saves. He does do saves. It's just the fact that if they are a bigger team, if it is a bigger if it is a bigger team with a stronger defense, they aren't going to be conceding as many chances, and that's kind of the end of it. But if there are tougher games, then hey, you might even get your 3 points that you're looking for as your benchmark for 4.5. So yeah, I'm fairly happy with Raya. He's the only one that I've put in my team and kind of gone, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I have you to thank for that, Sam.
Yeah, I mean, word of warning, it is so boring, isn't it? Like, I am sorry for having to reveal that data to everyone, because it does seem dull picking a 5.5 million keeper that will almost never get anything more than a 6 point, maybe 7 point if you're really lucky. But I think the balance of the scales has tipped ever so slightly towards just favouring the quality of the Arsenal defence now, where 5.5 to me does make a lot of sense, especially because it's a nailed route into such a good defence for 0.5 million less than any of the other defenders available in Arsenal's back line. And it also means that I can have a bit more fun with the three on the pitch in defence for me. So previously, what I was struggling with is, okay, I've got Saliba in my back line, or Gabriel or something, and then I'm always sacrificing one of Trent or Gvardiol or Porro or Munoz, actually two of all of them, and even Hall as well at Newcastle is coming into my thinking quite strongly at the moment. And basically having Saliba in there means that I'm just banking the clean sheets effectively from Arsenal and not getting any of the upside that all of those other defenders do have. So I think it is boring, but considering how few 4.5 million keepers out there are looking either A, secure, or B, likely to keep any sort of amount of clean sheets in the opening few game weeks, I think it's a pretty nice way to kind of just cover off a good base of points every single week, or at least quite a few weeks. And you're just never going to want to transfer him out. Even if you wanted to hold off on the wild card, he's a keeper you're never going to have a problem with. So yeah, anyway, boring, sorry. But it's a player I do actually feel quite warm to at the moment. I think he could stand a very good chance of being the keeper in my game week 1 lineup. Him or Henderson at this point for me.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's not a cut and dried season for goalkeepers, and I think that it kind of does lend itself to this sort of character. I don't mind Pickford; that's absolutely fine if you want to go there. I don't even mind Martinez either if you're looking to wildcard a little bit later. Neither of those choices really worry me, and you can kind of make a window into men's souls and think that Martinez versus Arsenal may be motivated. Yeah, I mean, I think at the moment it makes sense to kind of have a player from the Arsenal defence, and as discussed, if you're not paying the 6.5 for White, you're kind of, if you're buying into what I'm saying, a little bit sort of reticent to pay for Saliba. Don't really want Gabriel. Don't know what the situation with Calafiori. It feels like you kind of default to Raya. It's not the sexiest pick, as Sam has given voice to, but it does make a lot of sense objectively, and Review seems to agree with that too, which is absolutely fine with me. Right, final fight off here, Sam, is the striker's not called Haaland. So I think that we can table the idea of going with a no Haaland draft. I think if you are in that situation, it may be worth thinking about sunk cost fallacy, the idea that maybe you've put in lots of time and effort into something and it's become kind of part of your fixed view of things, despite evidence pointing the other way. I know that he's a very expensive, Haaland. The fact is, though, that it's not really based on underlying returns, not really based on, something we can codify in the underlying numbers. It's basically based on them gaming the system to prevent what we saw last year when 80% of managers had Haaland in game week 1. That is literally it. The reason they've done that, and it shows in the underlying kind of ownership, which is creeping up. It was kind of 30-40%, and now it's kind of approaching half. And I think it will tick over half. His captaincy, effectively, and it's giving people a choice. And that's what we really liked about it, especially when you combine that with other factors, compound it with the Salah price, etc., etc. But I think at the moment, especially with Ipswich game week 2 in mind, yes, you may blank that, and is that a victory for no Haaland people? It will be said so on Twitter, but I'm not entirely sure it is. I think it makes a lot of sense to go with Haaland. But that kind of calls a few questions to mind. I think that Isaac is pretty nailed in most people's teams. Honestly, he's the highest owned player at the moment, and could well end up being the chalk captain really for game week 1 as it stands against Southampton. But there's lots of other choices out there for the first striker, aren't there, Sam?
Yeah, there's. Pardon me. Yeah, there are a lot of other choices and structures as well, because some people are even going for a 3-5-2 at this point and binning off the third striker. I think we can probably table that for now because that makes this whole discussion a little bit pointless. But the other two ways to play that third striker are either look at the budgets, so 6 million and under. So you can look at your Muniz, Wood. You can look at even Calvert-Lewin as well at 6 million, I believe. Not really that tempted there. But then 5.5 as well, you've got Joao Pedro, you've got Adam Armstrong as well. So there are some really decent options at that price point. Or you can have a pretty mega front three of Haaland, Isak, and say either A, Watkins, or B, a Solanke. You could even look at Mateta as a C option, although I think because of his involvement at the Olympics, we'll probably table that one for now. But it's all about structure really at this point. And it's whether you like the look of the value at 6 million and 5.5 million, or you are willing to chuck a couple more quid at it, put in Solanke, and you can basically guarantee 80 plus minutes a game. And you will get good underlying data and probably 15 to 20 goals from it. It's just whether or not you can find that elsewhere with the cheaper assets.
Yeah, and there's a plethora of those out there at the moment. I mean, I think Solanke's move to Spurs has been certainly something which has moved the needle for a lot of people. His ownership went from, I'm going to say, pretty much nowhere up to a quarter. Is it near a quarter now? I learnt the other day that his actual name was Dominic Solanke Mitchell, which I didn't.
Yeah, I learned that today as well. Weird. Yeah, I had no idea.
No, fair play. Probably just too much to put on the back of the shirt, really, isn't it?
Yeah,
But yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense to go with him against Leicester if you are going there. I think Kulusevski had a very good end of pre-season, from what I understand. But I don't know. I'd be very surprised, given kind of how Ange does things, if Sankey wasn't kind of introduced from the off for
definitely.
them. So I'm absolutely fine if you do want to go there. I had Watkins in my team for an awfully long time. Obviously, game week 3 versus Leicester is going to be a point where maybe that's going to be concerning for a lot of people. Be concerning for me as well. Is there a way that I can get to Watkins in game week 3 with 2 transfers? Is definitely my mind with the building of the team that I'm doing at the moment. I'm kind of putting that off right now, dealing with that, but it's something I'm going to have to think about. But there are just so many options really for that third striker slot, if you really think about it. And it's just the case potentially of whether you value that third striker slot over fifth midfielder slot or a fourth defender slot. Actually, a lot of the time. So spoilers, I'm in a 3-5-2 at the moment, just because I'm not entirely sure right now, especially if we kind of distribute towards the defence with an Alexander-Arnold, Gvardiol and Porro backline plus Raya as well. I'm not quite sure how it all sort of fits together. There are a few players kind of out there. I know that you were extolling the virtues of Muniz before. Not very long ago. João Pedro, a favourite of yours, there's lots of Chris Wood and things like that hanging around, and even at the higher bracket, there's Havertz too. So if you don't really want to pay the 10 million for Saka, there's the 8 for Havertz. However, the problem potentially is that he can be deployed in all number of positions, and you may well find that your 8 million striker is playing as number 8. Versus Wolves, which obviously wouldn't be ideal. Although I would kind of back him still to get involved. It's just something that you probably wouldn't want to see when kickoff rolls around.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the interesting thing with this third striker bracket is it's not a decision to be made in a vacuum. It also depends where you're looking for that 7th or 8th midfielder as well, a little bit. And okay, yes, you can very happily double up on a team and both players could easily do very well. But if we're talking about a team of the quality of a Brighton, a Southampton or a Fulham, probably more so Southampton than the other two, you're probably only looking at 1 or 2 goals a game on average, especially in Southampton's case, probably at a push. If you're going with a couple of their assets, i.e., okay, we'll go with Fulham because it's very unlikely people are going to go Brereton, Diaz and Armstrong. That would be insane even for me, wearing a Southampton kit with a Southampton logo in the background. But Muniz with Smith Rowe, for instance, both on their own merit, very good picks seemingly. But even with those fixtures, I feel like I'd want to spread my risk a little bit, and I want to try and figure out which one of those 2 players I'm backing to be the talismanic figure in the opening 5 game weeks. And then, depending on that decision, I will then maneuver my other position. So, for instance, if I decide that Smith Rowe is the standout option as a 5.5 million midfielder, I'm not necessarily cold on Muniz because I still think he's a great asset, but I also quite like the look of Brighton's fixtures overall. And João Pedro's data is fantastic and he should be on penalties. So overall, that might swing me towards a Pedro and a Smith Rowe draft rather than, say, the opposite, where I go for Yankuba Minte in the midfield and go for a Muniz up top. Now, that would cost me 0.5 extra, so you've got to factor that in as well. And then obviously you bring Southampton into the mix as well with Armstrong on penalties, good data from the Championship, Brereton Diaz, good data with Sheffield United as well. So you could even look at Nottingham Forest as well. I'm colder on Nottingham Forest than I think most other people are. I did like Chris Wood when I first started looking at it, but I think Awoniyi for me is too much of a minutes risk now. I think he'll get subbed on in most, if not all of the games. So we're looking at Chris Wood getting 70 minutes most weeks. And often I wouldn't be surprised to see Awoniyi starting ahead of Chris Wood as well eventually. So for me, I've gone a little bit colder on him, even if the data is very strong. At the moment, it's between João Pedro and Muniz, and depending which one of those two, which midfielder I go for out of Minte or Smith Rowe, I'll probably go for the opposite up front, and possibly even a rotation trio of a Southampton option, a Brighton option, and a Fulham option, because those three, if you start 2 each week, rotate really, really nicely, and you avoid all of the tough fixtures there.
Woof. Well, that was a lot to cover.
Sorry.
No, just the whole pick your fighter bit, an awful lot there. Hopefully that's kind of helps you at least begin to try to make some decisions surrounding that. There's so much you can think about really within this particular section. Let's move on to bold claims of the season and bold claims overall. So bold claims are something that we came up with last year, didn't we, Sam? It was kind of just something that we kind of tried to keep track on throughout the year. We've got 3 kind of season-long bold claims, and we do a bold claim every week. Last year, I won 9-8. I think on the season on bold claim. So yeah, our hit rate, our potency isn't particularly high. I mean, they are bold for a reason. And
Exactly.
I think I won 1-0 on the season long bold claims last year. We worked out earlier on. So I think last year mine were something quite. They were pretty sort of very here and now. I think it was kind of 200 club for Watkins, which is they easily got that. I can't remember what the other ones were, Sam. Because I was going to
be a factor.
Yeah, Trent's not be a factor.
And then I think Arsenal and Man United midfielders.
Yeah, owning one of owning 2 of Saka, Martinelli, Bruno, and Rashford. I think it was all season for at least 30 games, which obviously every season's different. And you had kind of something along those lines as well, like very sort of difficult to pin down. But this year we've kind of tried to go for it again with something slightly different as well. First one for me this year is passing of the baton. So Saka to outscore Salah as he cruises to his third 200 club in a row. Saka, one of those players who's been steadily ticking up in his overall sort of FPL efficacy, I'd say, over time. A bit of a slower burn, Phil Foden. Last year, his best return that we've seen, best underlying data we've ever seen. Seems to have added far post headers to his game as well recently, which is quite interesting. But yes, I really think that Saka is going to take it up another level this year, obviously barring injury, but hey, these are bold claims for a reason, and get his third 200 club in the year in a row. Second one is Ox 200. So I mentioned talisman theory that over the last few years, we've seen from the dog days of COVID when we had just 4, which were Kane, Son, Bruno and Salah in the 200 club. Things have really gotten interesting, and with more goals being scored and things like that. The fantastic crop of Premier League managers probably feeds into that a lot. I think this year we're going to see the highest 200 club membership of 8 since the 2019-20 season. So since for 5 years, I do think that there's definitely quite a lot on the table. The third one is taking bold claims verbally, a little bit literally. So Voldemort, a bold manager to win the sack race this year as a general sort of football one. Had a bit of back and forth over which managers actually count as being bold. So there are a few. I think, obviously this is more targeted as a dig at my United sporting friends. But yeah, Ten Hag, Maresca, Slot. There's no way Slot's going to go. Pep, I think that's very unlikely. I don't know if we're going to class Dyche as being bold. I think we probably should.
We'll get it. Yeah.
That's my bold claim, but a manager can't get buzz cut, as you said to me earlier on, and they have to be sacked as well for this one to come in. So they can't resign to go to another club. So if Guardiola takes the England job, which we'd all dearly love him to, and mutual consents, I think, would have to go to the jury to be decided. But yeah, those are my 3 for this year.
Nice. Before I pass, move on to mine, do you want to go through your Game Week 1 as well specifically?
Yep. So this week, my bold claim for Game Week 1 is that a player under 5% owned is the top scorer for this week. You can imagine it being a defender. Just a random defender. Let's say Willy Bolly. Maybe Van Heck. Willy Bolly at Forest has that sort of level of off he goes and gets a brace from a couple and gives white corners just out of nowhere, and suddenly he's the guy who goes up to 4.8 by game week 2, and we're all saying going no, and then off he goes again and gets another goal against Southampton. But yeah, it's that sort of thing. I think in the sheer randomness of game week 1 we're going to see. So yeah, I'm hanging my hat on that.
Very nice. I like it. I think we're off to a good start. Those are all objective as well, so we can actually measure them really well. My ones are quite simple. So it has been the case before, but obviously with the drop off of clean sheets last season and Trent's drop off as well, I think it's fairly bold to say that he will be one of the 200-point club members again this year. I think we'll see the resurgence of Trent, even under new management, even in a slightly new system, and even with all of the defensive frailties in the Premier League and at Liverpool specifically. I think he's due a absolutely barnstorming season, and I think he's going to be a big factor in our teams once again. Point number 2 is definitely bold, although I have my reasoning. So Onana to be the top scoring keeper in FPL this season. The reason being, Man United were absolutely awful defensively last season, and he was still only 20 points off of the top spot, Pickford, with 153. Onana got 133, and obviously there's a lot of room for improvement there. They've just signed De Ligt as well, and I do imagine they will improve defensively because there's only really one way it can go. It can't really get much worse, surely, without Ten Hag getting sacked. You would expect with injuries relieving this season for United that they do improve a little bit. If they do, I predict 3 or 4 extra clean sheets that could make up the gap between him and the other keepers. He does make a lot of saves, and in doing so will probably get a few bonus points here and there, more so than the other keepers, now that bonus points are harder to come by for keepers. So I think he'll probably capitalize on that and be the top point scoring keeper. Point number 3, Minte to have a huge breakout season. I'm very hot on him. Whether or not I go with him from the start is another point entirely, but I think across the season he will be one of the talking points and one of the breakout stars at 5.5 million. I'm going with him getting 20 plus attacking returns. That's goals and assists in FPL. We're not going to measure it based on the real life assists. We are going to have FPL assists in there as well. So yeah, I think those are my 3 bold claims for the season, all fairly measurable and objective. And my game week 1 shout, which will go against my Trent shout, is that Ipswich will score 2+ goals in game week 1. I think it will be a bit of a back and forth. Ipswich will give it a right go in their return to the Premier League at Portman Road as well. And they were good going forward last season in the Championship too. So I think it'll be gung-ho. There'll be goals at both ends. I do think Liverpool will win, but I actually think it'll be 3-2, 4-3. A bit like, I think 3 or 4 seasons ago when Leeds got promoted and played at Anfield. I think that was 4-3. And I can see it going in a very similar manner against Ipswich in game week 1.
Yeah, I really like that. I'd look at Onana, Man United's defensive data just off the back of that quickly. And they were second, literally just below Sheffield United, who are one of the worst teams we've seen in the Premier League, and like 4 shots more than Luton last year in terms of shots conceded overall. Like, and in terms of shot off target conceded, I think they were also kind of like 3rd or something like that.
Yeah.
And the distance as well, they were conceding shots was also fairly high. I think Arsenal's was the highest kind of distance they were getting shots from. So there's lots of ingredients there that could go very well into Onana. And plus, he could assist every now and then.
He could, yeah.
Get an assist. You never know. Could even, just hit a high hanging ball and it kind of loops over the goalkeeper.
Begovic, was it, against Southampton all those years ago?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Tim Howard as well did it, didn't he? Obviously, we're hoping for that for Raya, but it could well happen for Onana. I would not be surprised to see that. I wonder if I don't think we'll see it this year, but I think from memory, it's either Brad Friedel or maybe Martinez in 2021. He got 185 points. I think he got
Martinez. got 180.
So maybe we'll see the 200 club for a goalkeeper someday soon. I'm not sure it'll be this year.
Nah,
not even De Gea in his pomp.
Not unless someone scores 3 goals, or if Ederson gets penalties, then maybe.
Great penalty in the Community Shield. We're all loving that. Right, excellent. So season aims for this year, we've already sort of discussed them to some extent in the pod on 10 mistakes I'm not going to make this year, etc., and so on and so on. Anything to just that you're going to quickly throw in as being sort of something that you want to say that you would be doing. I remember you were kind of quite keen on making sure that you're attacking a lot more than you were last year, and maybe kind of reflecting your obviously having your own YouTube channel and also being part of this as well. Is that kind of your main thing? 'Cause it felt like to me that would be was your main sort of consideration for how you're going to try to change how you play.
Yeah, so a stronger sense of instinct and intuition, I think, is really important for me this season to really nail down what I believe is going to happen, especially at the start of the week before I start absorbing content. I think that will be really important and means that I won't lose sight of my overall plan. I think there are certain points that I've mentioned in this podcast, even that I don't want to take too many silly risks based on X-Mins in the opening few game weeks. That's something that I want to abide by as well. And that's an instinct that I want to maintain, especially in the opening few. But then also, like you mentioned there, knowing when to attack and when I can gather the data that I've seen so far in the season. And I feel like I've got enough there to make new judgments based on templates that are forming and things that maybe other people are missing, and be brave enough to follow through on those assumptions and those instincts in my own team without being scared of what other people are necessarily going to think of it, not to hide within myself and just start making the safe moves even if I don't believe in them.
Makes a lot of sense. I think for me, it's going to be leaning into the format and also just trying to get back to the KISS strategy or the KISS approach, keep it simple, stupid. I think the format definitely helps with incentivizing me to not be making the sort of silly moves that we discussed last year. On a couple of occasions, which I won't go into now because if you've been listening for a while, you'll know them. I think it's just kind of trying to return to keeping FPL as simple as I possibly can across the decisions that I make. Obviously, it's going to be quite difficult to do so, especially in the early kind of season. There's a lot of randomness at the start. I think that's fair to say, especially now that we've got less of a template. But I think that as the season begins to progress, a template kind of potentially solidifies. It always does at some point. That's going to be the time where I think that I'm going to have to just try to have as my sort of North Star, keep it simple, stupid. Don't be making those sorts of trifling moves, shall we say, that we shouldn't be making. Yes, there's kind of the counterpoint as given, kind of speaking to your point about aggression versus sitting on your resting on your laurels, but I think that there has to be kind of reason and making sure that we've got our process sort of nailed, but something we'll definitely speak about during the course of the season. But that's kind of my main one from the 10 mistakes thing, and something that we both kind of spoken about as well at the end of last year. Last minute advice as well, going into game week 1, I think there's definitely a few sort of elements which are obviously really important to just kind of instill. I think we say this every year, or this podcast at least said this every year. So I've said this every year. If you've been listening for the last 8 years, thank you. And also, how are you not bored of me, honestly? Even my other half is in my baby. She only known me for 16 months. But there are a few kind of bits and pieces, I think. The first one that I think it's worth examining actually is that idea that you can't win FPL on game week 1, but you can lose it. I think you hear that a lot, and I think that kind of feels true of some seasons, but this year it does feel like there's definitely capacity to be a bit puntier game week 1. Take a few more risks. I'm not saying it's a massive kind of scope for risk, once we've got the ratio in a minute, but I feel like there's not that much which is going to really whammy you if you're sat there without Isaac and Haaland. I think that there's, I think you probably know what you're doing, but it's probably not going to be the case that you'll be missing some huge player that no one else has got. There's going to be stuff like kind of not having an Arsenal defender, which may kind of be a bit of a sleeper hit for you. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, so you definitely can't necessarily lose FPL overall in game week 1. I think there's always 37 other game weeks to contest with, but you can get yourself in a little bit of a mess pretty quickly if you get off to a bad start and you keep doubling down and you kind of find yourself 5 or 6 moves away from what you consider to be a good draft. I think this season, more than before, because we've got the transfers that can be rolled through the wild card. There is a lower bar for what would constitute a wild card button being pressed, and therefore you can get yourself out of a hole a bit more immediately if you want to, without necessarily seeing quite so many consequences. There are also less double game weeks as well to contest with. So a wildcard bar in the second half of the season is probably a lower bar as well again. So I think you can take a few more risks in game week 1. Just be, I think, tactical about what your risks are based on. I wouldn't be going out and putting risks on 3 or 4 of your starting players based on expected minutes. I'd be placing more risk on maybe 1 or 2 of them for maybe some slight expected minutes, but more so than anything else, I can see this player increasing their underlying data this season based on what I've seen in preseason. Those sort of gambles, I think, are safer because at least you can still rely on the minutes to be okay. And then maybe you get a lucky goal or a lucky assist out of it. Whereas if you're taking a lot of different gambles all at once on players that you can't guarantee are going to either A, start, or B, get good minutes week in, week out, then within 2 or 3 weeks, you might end up with 4 or 5 transfers being need to make 4 or 5 transfers rather. And then you are looking at potentially a wild card to get out of it. And then you're already a few steps behind other managers. So I think it's contextual, and it's what are you willing to take those risks on. You definitely can't lose it in game week 1, though. I think that's a myth, especially this season, that we can probably put to bed a little bit. I've seen managers get back from really, really bad starts and still nail top 10k finishes. It's 1 game week. Just make sure you don't put yourself in such a mess that you're 4 or 5 players behind what is going to be a good team come game week 2 and 3.
Yeah, I mean, I think that probably kind of nicely links us into the other things I was going to mention here. So I think every season's a little bit different. Last year, we saw a very kind of heavy sense of templation at the very beginning. There were quite a few players kind of knocking around the kind of 40-50% ownership already. This year, as mentioned, because the pricing's been good, and we don't see that. So I think that kind of impacts 2 things. One, how template should you go at the start of the year? Should you just default to the template effectively? And your punt safe ratio, what should that be? So in the past, I think we probably have advised maybe having 2 punts max in your starting 11. I think this year you're probably okay to go with 3, honestly, just because the ownership is so spread. I think that's absolutely fine. And I think this year as well, I mean, yes, you need to keep some semblance of what could possibly hurt you. I think that's absolutely fine to do. Look at the downsides, look at the vulnerabilities, as Lucy would always say. I think that's absolutely fine to do. I know that kind of sounds quote unquote boring, but with kind of the rare pick, as Sam really eloquently kind of put across earlier on, the underlying data is so good for Arsenal, and also pragmatically, the ownership level is still there. Ownership is still part of the game. Maybe it shouldn't be kind of the be all and end all of how you make your picks, but it should be something that you at least bear in mind with how you put your team together. That said, this year, as I mentioned, that the ownership is so dispersed across the player base right now that you can probably get away with not being as template as you could have maybe wanted to be in the years before if you were trying to be safe. So, for example, the highest owned midfield at the moment is still Palmer. I haven't seen him in any squads really out there. Watkins is still owned by 43% of the people. I haven't seen him in any squads out there in the kind of quote unquote engaged community. And Saliba as well, I have seen him owned a bit more. But those for 3 players above 40% owned, 2 of them I have not seen really kind of out there as much. So I think there's definitely kind of recourse to be a little bit more enabled to back your own instincts, your own hunches. Hopefully we've informed you, assisted you a little bit on those. He said it. So hopefully that's kind of, I think that it should be quite a fun game week 1, at least to go into. The outputs are always going to be worse than the inputs, but I don't know, Sam. I feel like this year there's definitely more license, isn't there, to go with those heart picks, as we were speaking about with the likes of Middlesbrough Rowe and your case with Burris and Diaz last week.
Yeah, 100%. Especially in those 6th, 7th, 8th attacker spots, there's a lot of X fun picks that you can go with potentially very high upside insides that will score a fair few goals as well. So yeah, I think there's definitely room for some fun. The ownership, as you said, is going to be fairly spread across the board, and definitely within those price points as well. I think most of us have at least one or two of those price points covered in our starting 11s at the moment. And I haven't really seen one real template pick form yet. Usually at this point in the season, there's at least one that kind of everyone's at least very highly considering. I think Smith Rowe is maybe just about the most popular pick in that kind of fun zone, but he's by no means template. I think he's still under 10% owned. So there's a lot of fun to be had there, and you can go against those options if you think you can see an opportunity elsewhere. And what all of this means is, yeah, you can look at diversifying even another couple of spots as well, because it is going to be a little bit death by a thousand cuts in terms of the ownership, rather than one big sledgehammer of a 150% owned Saka that just goes against you week in, week out if you're going against him. Same goes for Palmer, same goes for Watkins, same will probably go for Son as well. They'll be 40-50% EO, and they'll probably hurt you a little bit every single week that you don't have them, but hopefully the player you have picked can compensate for that. And that is the gamble that we're taking. And honestly, I think that's just a fun way for FPL to be set up this year.
Really is. And then if we throw in as well the changes, especially regarding rolling, and I think this segues us into our kind of provisional and final drafts. Is it worth having a wildcard plan this year? Because normally, as I said to you a few times, it's not something that I like doing. I like kind of being kind of like, I'll roll with it, I'll take my time, I'll see what I can see. But at this point, I feel like how I've set up, I'm looking at wildcard game week 4, 5, or 6. Like, I feel like that's going to be what's going on, plus the fact that you kind of can roll 3 transfers up wildcard, and then you create that snowball effect that I've spoken about previously. I do think in planning at the moment, it does feel like against my kind of priors, it's worth factoring in the idea that you may be wildcarding fairly early. Is that something that's factored in for you?
Oh yeah, definitely, in a big way. And maybe this is a good opportunity to look back at some drafts at the moment. So I'll put mine up on screen, and maybe we can start talking about it. But I'm pretty set in my mind that I'm going to wildcard after game week 5, so into game week 6. There's a nice fixture swing around then. So you can get rid of the likes of your Newcastle and your Liverpool assets, for instance, and move heavily towards your Arsenal in particular. But also a few other teams have very positive swings around that point in time as well. I won't go into depth as to why that is now, because we are closing in on our hour and a half already. But there's an excellent podcast by The Wire that goes into it as well that I highly recommend you go and have a look at. Praz is an absolute genius when it comes to these sort of things. So yeah, I highly recommend that, and a little plug for The Wire. But the other main reason I'm looking at wildcarding at a set point in time, which I don't usually do, in fact, I've never done it this strongly before, is that I've come to the realization that no matter how much I plan, and no matter how much I'm certain about so much going into game week 1, within 2 or 3 weeks, so much changes. Every single season, without fail, 1,000,001 things change. There's a whole new narrative forming. There are picks that I'd never even considered that come onto the radar. And especially this season, where it's very difficult to get every single player you want. There are so many 9.5 to 10.5 million midfielders that I could very, very feasibly want in my team after game week 2 or 3. Knowing when I'm wildcarding, I'm really building a side that is basically charging down those first 5 game weeks with everything that it's got, really attacking those fixtures and really attacking what I know to hold true. And then being able to have a clean slate, hopefully have saved a few transfers so I can roll them through the wild card this year, and then be really well set up going into game week 6 with a solid base of information of how the narratives are forming for the season and which teams are really coming on strong. That's my plan. And hopefully within all of that chaos, I can bank a few good points from the first few game weeks. I can hopefully roll a few transfers and be really well set up going into quite a long period where I won't be able to wildcard, obviously, until the second half of the season. And that is my strategy at this point in time.
Yeah, yeah. It certainly reflects in your team as well, which does look to be mostly set up for just taking the temperature, seeing what
Yeah.
happens. Lots of logical picks in there. A bit of, as you mentioned earlier, a bit of kind of rotating between possible sort of options as fixtures allow.
Yeah.
Can you quickly just talk us through where you are?
Let's do it. So, Raya will surprise no one based on my monologue earlier in goal. Munoz, Porro, and Gvardiol, all with decent attacking upside, and at least two of them in good defenses. Porro is basically the compromise at the moment. This did previously have Trent in the side. I spoke about him earlier. I'm very hot on him, but I really needed that 1.5 to upgrade elsewhere, and I wasn't keen enough on the double Palace defense that I've discussed previously to go with Henderson and Munoz. So I wanted to upgrade Henderson to Raya, needed a bit of money to do that. And I also wanted to upgrade my fifth midfielder as well, which I'll discuss in a moment's time. So Trent, sadly, at the moment is out. I've come to the realization that I'm really struggling to have both Trent and Salah in a draft that I like. So one of the two will probably not make it to game week 1. I am currently having a very close look at what a draft would look like without Salah and with Trent. So yeah, very, very open to switching it before the deadline. So yeah, stay tuned on that one. But as it stands in the midfield, I've got Salah still as my bus team captain as well. Nkunku and Eze have stayed in a lot of the drafts. Nkunku is one that I'm ever so slightly wavering on at the moment, just based on the sheer volume of Chelsea midfielders that are now available. Even Joao Felix is potentially going to be signing for them. So it's a bit of a cluster at the moment, and it does look like a mess. He looks fantastic and he's going to be great value for money. But there are other good options that I could get to if I downgraded Salah and then upgraded Nkunku. For instance, I could look at a Saka and Bruno combination instead of a Salah and Nkunku. So that's something I'm considering. The fourth and fifth midfielders are Minte and Smith Rowe, the two 5.5s that I'm most hot on at the moment, as discussed earlier on. And what I would do here is use them in a rotation trio with Adam Armstrong up top. As I discussed, if you play 2 out of 3 of them every single week, you always get a good pairing of fixtures. And that third player is strong enough, even in the tough fixtures, that you wouldn't mind them sat first on the bench for the first 5 game weeks. And if I get an injury, it saves me a transfer. Happy to play any single one of them, even in the toughest game. I think the toughest one possible is Brighton away at Arsenal in game week 3. For Minte, he would be sat on my bench, and even in that game, I would probably make peace with bringing him on rather than making a transfer if one of my other players got injured. Up top, the other two, very easy, are Haaland and Isak, and on the bench to round it off is Barco and Harwood Bellis. Both of them should be decent enough on the minutes that because I'm planning a wildcard in game week 6, I'm okay with 2 4.0s. I think they'll be secure until then, and Harwood Bellis should be secure for the entire season.
Yep, that's absolutely fine to me. I feel like we're at the point of preseason now where I'm going to tell you to basically buy my draft if I was to give you advice, honestly.
And vice versa.
I do think that comes from a position, if you're newer to FPL, that may sound a bit kind of weak, but honestly, we can debate all of these players, but there's merit to all these players, and Sam and I have both been talking about, as I said at the very beginning, even in the intro, that there are kind of so many paths you can take. There's probably about kind of 30, 40 players that are actually within the consideration set for all of us in FPL, and just getting that configuration right for what suits you as an FPL manager is what's important here. I think that is kind of the keystone for how you're going to be setting up your team. And there's a few things here, and I'll go into my team in a second, which just don't suit me, but that is due to my play style. That's what I like to do versus what you like to do. But a lot of that makes a lot of sense. I have moved away, as I mentioned earlier on, from a Salah draft, but that's I think that's a very kind of serviceable Salah and Haaland draft, and it could be one akin to that I end up kind of ending up on. Really, it's just kind of it's not where I am right now. So where I am right now is very similar to you with Raya and goal and the 4.0 goalkeeper. I think it's like Fabianski right now, but I mean that could frankly be anyone. I guess get the feeling that will just be whatever. At the back I've got Guardiola and Porro like you. I've got Trent at the moment because I don't have Salah, and I want Trent and Jota, who's also in my team, if I'm not going with Salah, just for extra sort of, I guess, mental security, more than anything else. Plus that kind of intuition potentially about just kind of the what I read about Slot and how the right back and left back sort of work for him. I do think Trent's going to be a very interesting pick this year. Last year I bold claimed him, as we mentioned earlier on, as being a bit irrelevant. This year I don't think that's going to be the case. I think he's going to be a very interesting kind of player to be throwing in. So kind of I've gone huge at the back basically, with Arsenal, Man City, Liverpool and Spurs represented. Don't have Slanky at the moment, so I think Porro is going to be the one who will be flying the flag for me basically in that game on Monday night. And I don't know beyond the first two games if he's going to last much longer than that. But I'm fine with that at the moment, even though as I said earlier on, I need to think a bit more about when I'm going to wildcard. And you made some really good points about making sure that you've got that sort of idea of how long it's going to work. So it's Newcastle game week 3, isn't it? And then Arsenal game week 4. And that's quite tricky for you're kind of just giving up that slot to variance. Unless, like me, you're sat there with Consa as your 4.5. The reason for that, alongside Barco, of course, the reason for that is that if I don't decide to wildcard early, I've at least got a player who can come in and do a job. If I don't want to be playing Porro for those games, I'm pretty much always going to be playing Alexander Arnold, pretty much always going to be playing Guardiola. I don't really care what the game is. But with Porro, the defensive frailty of Spurs that we saw last year may well mean that I'd be happier to play Consa in those. Not the sexiest pick, and I know last year a few points. James on Planet was saying that he got like below 100 points,
91 points,
in a Champions League defense, but still the fixtures are good enough. The signing of Banana is what I'm hanging my hat on for that. So hopefully it'll be okay, and at least it would look better playing Consa versus playing Porro against Arsenal, for example. Although it could be the other way. In midfield at the moment, and this is reflective really strongly on what I mentioned earlier on about different play styles. I hate bench points. I just despise them. I once benched Sadio Mane, who saw a hat-trick for Southampton, the quickest hat-trick ever. I can't remember who it was against, but I benched him. I think it might have been, actually.
Yeah.
I was going to say West Ham, but so that kind of...
It was definitely Claret.
Definitely Claret. And since then, I've just been burnt by bench points. I don't care. I just don't like them at all. So that means all my money's basically on the pitch. In midfield, I've got a few pump picks, honestly. So you're looking at, I've got Bob at the moment for reasons that we discussed. I've got Jota at the moment for reasons we discussed. Eze, who I'm wavering on, frankly, he could end up being Gibbs White or something like that for 3 weeks. I don't really know at the moment what I'm doing with that. It does feel like I'm more on the punty side, so I need to change that with those 3 there. I've got 0.5 million in the bank here, so there could be something that would happen with Bob or something that would happen with Jota. So Bob, Jota, and Eze, I'm not too sure on those 3 as being part of the midfield, especially not Bob. But I'm really not sure about that. That could end up being maybe even Hudson-Odoi again. Back to that, but Saka, Smith Rowe, it's not just my Arsenal bias. I don't really. I'm not a particularly tribal football fan. I'm not particularly blinkered about it being my team, my club, etc., and so on and so on. But I think they're objectively both have very strong cases for being in an FPL team at the start of the year, and having Salah and Saka and Trent is just unviable. There's no way of doing that. So the more I looked at it, going as I've started kind of really being in the hellscape of Tinkertown, the more I've been worried about not owning Saka. And I think that there's a very good chance I'll start with him. I don't really see Odegaard as being a sop for Saka. I know there's a bit of a price difference there, which can enable other things. But I really don't see Odegaard as being quite the same quality offering in an FPL sense as Saka is as a player. Yes, I'm in a 3-5-2, therefore, with Haaland and Isaac as the front two. I don't give a crap who it is. I think we've got like Jebison in there at the moment as the 4.5. So when I was looking at this, really, I realised that if I did go for the 3-5-2, this was probably the best way I'd look at it. I've got 0.5 in the bank. If I use that 0.5, it would be to remove, probably take Bob up to João Pedro and go into a 3-5-2. It could be that Eze goes down to a 6.5. Honestly, I am a little bit spooked about the fact that City could just slap in his release fee and then his head gets turned over the course of this week. But if that happens, obviously, I think that would be a massive exodus for everybody.
Yeah, no one would have him at that point.
He's a bit of a default at the moment, just due to pragmatic reasons, due to the ownership. So there's loads that could change about this. Honestly, loads. The things that are probably locked in now are 4 players, effectively. So Haaland, Isaac, Smith Rowe, and Gvardiol are probably the 4 players who are actually locked in. Like, there's a revolving cast of characters who could potentially come in elsewhere. So yeah, I think it just kind of betrays the fact that I'm sure we're all in this kind of situation at the moment where we're all kind of just trying to find a configuration which fits well for us and kind of sits comfortably for us. For me at the moment, this is what's sitting comfortably, but I'm not particularly happy about having Bob Jota at the moment, just because there's so many yeah buts attached to them. But for the rest of the team, there aren't those yeah buts attached to them. So that's the trade-off I've sort of made, where I've got 2 kind of punty picks for different reasons, but I don't have the bench cover particularly. You'll be looking at kind of playing Barco over Bob for game week 1 and hoping that Bob comes in for game week 2. And it's a case of what happens if Bob kind of loses space to Savinho, aka Riyad Mahrez Mark II. Where am I going to go after that? That is definitely a consideration for me. There's loads of questions that I could be asked if I put this on like X, for example. What are you going to do about this? No, why? It's always going to be the same answer. I don't really know yet, or I'll see what happens. And it's about trying to find a place we were most comfortable, because there's always going to be yeah buts about how have we set up this year, whereas last year it was very much kind of like, here's a team. Oh, fine, because it's really, really flipping obvious what we're going to be doing. This year is a lot more interesting. It's really exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we wrap up, just a quick note to mention that is probably something we should all be doing with our teams before starting the season. Look at the team quality that you've got covered off here. You've got triple Man City, best team in the league last season, double Arsenal, second best team, double Liverpool, top 4 team. You've got Newcastle covered, Fulham, who look like they've got great fixtures, covered, and Spurs covered as well. And obviously Crystal Palace, who had a great end to the season. So you've got all, or at very, very least, most of the top quality teams' bases covered at the start of the year. So I think it's a good looking draft. It's obviously not the draft I've currently got at the moment, but like you said, there are maybe 4 or 5 nail picks in either of our starting fit or whole 15s at the moment. So we could effectively swap our entire teams before the game week 1 deadline based on that sort of information. So lots to consider at the moment. Hopefully this pod has been helpful. It certainly has for me. Lots for me to think about based on what Tom's been saying. But hopefully it's been helpful for you out there too. In the meantime, though, we have been Who Got the Assist. You can find us on X at WGTA_FPL or myself at FPL Pricey, also over on YouTube there as well. On Instagram and Threads at WGTA.FPL. And again, I'm just FPL Pricey on there. And if you did enjoy the pod, we really appreciate it if you could follow us on those social channels, but also if you could give the pod a 5-star rating on Spotify, iTunes, wherever you're listening. And of course, if you've been watching along on YouTube, still 30 plus of you in the chat, if you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel, won't cost you anything. It's super, super helpful to us. So thank you so much in advance for doing that.
Yep, thank you very, very much. Thanks for listening to pre-season. Hopefully you enjoyed it. We'll be back next Monday, halfway through Leicester versus Spurs, to reflect on the opening weekend. And I think probably lament on all the things that we missed out on, all those players that we almost got in our drafts and didn't quite include. But hey, there we go. All the best for game week 1. Good luck. I hope this is you. I'll speak to you very, very soon.
Oh, it's a goal. Who got the assist?